psychiatry students were in their college class one day when their professor began a discussion to prove a point. What we're going to talk about today, the professor said, are the emotional extremes that many mentally disturbed people go through. For example, what's the opposite of joy? He asked one student. Sadness, the student answered. The opposite of depression, he asked a young lady. Elation, she replied. Turning to a young man from Texas, he said, the opposite of woe. He said, well, now, the Texan replied, I suppose the opposite of woe would be giddy up. A businessman on his deathbed called his friend and said, Bill, I want you to promise me that when I die, you'll have my remains cremated, Bill said. And what do you want me to do with your ashes, he replied. Just put them in an envelope and mail them to the Internal Revenue Service and write on the envelope, now you have everything. One more. The teacher said to her students, boys and girls, there's a wonderful example in the life of an ant. Every day the ant goes to work and works all day. Every day the ant is busy. And in the end, what happens? Little Johnny spoke up and said, someone steps on him. Honestly, if you think about the last one, just kind of, in kind of a, I don't know, maybe a whimsical way, but in a real way, sometimes that's life. Sometimes it seems like in life we just work so hard and we try to do everything, the best that we can, and in the end somebody just steps on you. You get to those moments in life to where, you think you've got it all together, everything's going well and everything's going great, and then it's just like, man, the weight of the world just comes crashing down. And to be honest with you this morning, that's just reality. And sometimes it's life, for all of us, in general. We try to make a difference, and all this stuff happens. And life sometimes just throws so many different things at us. If you think about it, I'm a sports nut, so I kind of think of it, let's say from a baseball perspective. Sometimes it's just a fastball right down the middle. And you know what? A pitcher can stand up, and the Kansas City Royals proved that this year. I don't care how hard you throw. If all you're going to do is throw heat, a good hitter will hit it eventually. They will. It's just, they're going to time it out, and it's going to happen. And you watch the Royals do that this year, not only just in the World Series, but throughout the whole year in the playoffs. You may beat them for 7 or 8 innings, but if all you're going to do is throw heat, we're going to beat you in the end. And so, that fastball comes, and we can handle that, but then every once in a while, you've got a pitcher that can sling a pretty good curveball or slider. And it just keeps you off time or a good changeup. And you know what? Life does that to us sometimes. It's not always just straight down the middle. There are things that happen, and you know what? Sometimes we can't even explain it. And you know what? Even sometimes it feels like we're getting beamed every pitch. Man, taking a shot off the head or in the back, and it's just, it hurts. And it's hard, but it's life. And this can lead to frustration. It can lead to sadness. It can even lead to depression. This morning I want to talk to you just a little bit about depression. I don't think I've ever preached a sermon or taught even on the subject. However, it is a subject that I know very, very well. It's a subject that I've not been to school for. I listen to my wife because my wife is studying a lot of things right now in her master's program, and so I get to hear a lot about it, and it's very, very interesting, and I love to hear all this different stuff, but I've not had those classes. But what I have done is live it, because for most of my life I've suffered from it. Sometimes it's been easier than others, and sometimes it's just, to be really, really honest with you, it has just been awful. And if you're here today and you've suffered from any form of depression, you'll be able to relate to me. Now, just really quickly, a definition that I'll give you of depression is a hopelessness that's not consistent with reality. It's not consistent with where you are and really what's going on. A temporary condition or emotional state with exaggerated feelings of sadness. It's more than discouragement that makes negative circumstances overwhelm a person's life. Now, some of the things that come along with that, maybe some symptoms are weight loss or weight gain. You either eat, too much or you don't eat at all. And to be honest with you, I've done both. Loss of sleep and energy, loss of interest in most or all pleasurable activities, reduced ability to concentrate, overcoming feelings of hopelessness or uselessness, socially reclusive, you just want to be alone all the time, and you struggle to maintain very healthy relationships. Now, the reality of this is this. Let me just say this. Studies show that if you live long enough, if a person lives long enough in their life, they will experience at least a season of depression. Every single person. You say, well, Pastor Ron, I've never been through depression. Well, let me just, break this down. A lot of times when we speak the word depression, a lot of times we immediately go to this long state of just being in this huge deep pit. And sometimes that's part of it. But sometimes you have, points or seasons of depression that could be caused by, a lot of different things. It could be caused by a breakup in a marriage or a rocky marriage or a rocky relationship. It could be caused by, the sudden loss of a job, anything that changes your life drastically or a tragedy. But the one that really grips us if you live long enough that you'll go through is grief from a loss. Losing a loved one, the death of a loved one, a family member or a close friend. And that's something that everyone will go through. Now, different people go through it in different ways. There's no question. But the reality of it is that once again, if you live long enough, you will go through it. 7 out of 10 people never do anything to help their depressive states or their sadness. 7 out of 10 people. 6 out of those 7 are men. They're men. And guys, if I just speak to you for just a really quick tidbit, the biggest reason for that is pride. It's pride. Because we're the man of the house. We're the one that's supposed to be leading our family. We're the one supposed to be leading in our workplace and our environment. And if we show any type of those tendencies whatsoever, then we're weak. We're not being the man that we're supposed to be. And everything just inverts, and you know what? It all just kind of piles in, and it piles in, and it piles in, and guys, it gets heavy. And you just don't, no hands raised, no heads nodded or anything, but I know some of you can relate. Now, ladies, I'm not saying that doesn't happen to you, because it definitely does. There's no question. But guys, the reality of it is this, once again, 7 out of 10 people, man or woman, we never say anything. We try to hide it. We keep it in. It's not a respecter of person. It affects regardless of male or female, young or old, color, race, rich or poor, no matter what. Now, honestly, I have to share this because it's the reality of what I've even heard in my own life. Some Christians, and I use that term respectfully, but they say that if a person is depressed, then they are living in sin. And you know what? Just to speak honestly, there's some of that is true. Some of that comes from, just different feelings and different things and, conviction and all that kind of stuff that comes along with it. But it is not entirely true. It's not. And I'm going to prove it to you today as we speak through. And we're going to look at, you're not just going to sit up here and listen to me ramble about my past experiences. I'm going to do the best that I can to bring some biblical things, some biblical stories, and some people from the Bible that have suffered from this and who have fought this and conquered this today. Because it's a part of life. In one way, shape, form, or fashion, it is going to be a season in your life. Dealing with the griping Israelites all the time, every day, day and night, had made Moses depressed. Now, when we mention Moses, you go back to one of the great leaders of the Old Testament and maybe of all time, I don't know, but here's this guy that God had chosen, had his burning bush moment, and leads him out of captivity. And I mean, listen, every single day, all day long, all he heard was griping and complaining. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was in that environment every day, I'd get depressed too. Because being around negativity, if all you're around is negativity, what do you think is going to come out of you? Because it's the only thing getting poured into you. Well, this is kind of the way Moses was feeling. And in Numbers, he actually says this in the book of Numbers in chapter 11. He says, I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. In verse 15, it says, if this is how you're going to treat me, then go ahead and kill me. I found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. Listen, that's deep. Sometimes we read things in the Bible, and it's easy to just read and just, the word. That is deep. I mean, he just said, man, this is how it's going to be? Man, I just want to die. You got to be in a pretty deep place for that. Job, he lost his entire family, lost all his property, got sores, got sick. Everything that could go wrong in this man's life went wrong. Everything. He cursed life. And at one time he said he wished he would have never been able to see the light of life. Jonah ran from God, got thrown in a sea, swallowed by a whale, puked up. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. And now he's faced with people who are driving him crazy, who he absolutely can't stand. But God is sending him to, and he says this in Jonah 4:3, he says, "Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than live." David. You know, if you read the Psalms, and you read a lot, especially the early Psalms, and you know, because when we say David, you say, well, now Pastor Ron, he messed up. Yes, he did. And some of the depressive tendencies that he had came after the mess up with Bathsheba. But early on, that's not what it came from. It came because he was running for his life from a man that was trying to kill him. And he spent nights in caves all alone in darkness and cold. And it was just, it was brutal. That would cause me to be depressive as well. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, man of God. He says this in Jeremiah chapter 20, "Cursed be the day that I was born. May the day my mother bore me not be blessed." I mean, listen to this. "Cursed be the man who brought my father the news, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son." Verse 16 says, "May that man be like the towns the Lord overthrew without pity. May ye hear wailing in the morning and a battle cry at noon. For he did not kill me in the womb with my mother. As my grave, her womb enlarged forever. Why did I ever come out of the womb to see trouble and sorrow and to end my days in shame?" Man of God, prophet of God, in a place so sorrowful and so deep, he is cursing the day that he was even. But he went as far to curse the man that came and told his daddy. That's deep. Elijah had just been a part of one of the biggest victories, maybe at that time, though, I don't know. You know, he stood up to the prophets of Baal, and God showed up, and all this amazing things happened. And then just a few days later, he was begging to die. In fact, he got into so deep of a depression that he just wanted to sleep. And you know what God did? He let him. He let him. Not only let him sleep, he sent him food. He took care of him. Jesus. Even he experienced a moment of extreme sorrow. In Matthew 26, I want you to listen to these words, more than just reading them on a screen. In verse 36, it says, Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." You know, it wasn't too long after he said that you know, he looked up at his daddy and he said, "Hey, Dad, if there's any other way." And you know why he said that? Because he knew what he was about to face. He understood that. He got it. But even for that short season, see, I've always been a man that believed that there's nothing that I've ever experienced that Jesus has not had to experience or fight or deal with or you know, overcome. Now, he's a man without sin, in which I am not, nor are you. But he gets it. I believe he gets it, and he understands. Sorrow to the point of death is a deep and a very dark place. And unfortunately, many people in life get there. Life just gets too tough. It gets too heavy. A loved one dies. Maybe you get sick, or your marriage is just awful. It seems like you're battling and just nothing's going right. Maybe a child is rebellious. You lose your job and you have nothing. Your car's broke down. You're broke. You have no job. No one will hire me. They just turned my electric off. I have no food. And we get to these places in life where it just becomes too much. And you know what? This is just real. I'm just being real because Jesus even said, he said, in this world, you'll have sorrows and troubles. He said, in this world, you're going to have tough times. In this world, there's going to be things that don't go right. In this world, there are going to be times to where, your heart's just heavy and things just stink and all of this stuff just happens. And in this world, it is going to happen. But in the very next breath, he says, take heart. Hang on. Because I've overcome that. And yes, we may have to experience it. And yes, there's going to be times that we go through it. But there's always hope found in Jesus. Now, I want to talk just a few things just really quickly. Maybe to help us get through some of these moments. Because once again, if you live long enough, you're going to experience something. It may not be a long-lasting, huge, big old long thing. But it'll be a moment. It'll be a season. And so, just to make this very clear, while it's an emotion that we will all experience, it doesn't have to be one that defeats us. So recognizing some things sometimes helps us. First, once again, let's identify maybe some times or some things that might, make this a bigger kind of a thing. Because sometimes, depressive things will happen during or after a relational conflict. During or after a relational conflict, we talked about, like during a marriage. If your marriage is really struggling and the stress of that is happening, or if you've got a struggle with it could be a friend, it could be anyone, and it's just day in and day out and day in and day out, it just becomes heavy, it becomes hard, and it's just easier when all that negativity just pours in to just allow that to consume you. The second way is during or after physical exhaustion, when you are just absolutely, completely physically tired. Now, I would add to that emotionally tired. When you are just exhausted to the point where you just don't feel like you can do it anymore. I mean, come on, Satan is no dummy. And he knows when I'm at my weakest point, and it is usually when I am physically and emotionally fatigued. That is mine. When I am stressed out to that point that it's just like, and it's just Satan just sits back and he just waits and he just waits and he just waits and he just waits for that window where it's just like, and he says, there's my window, bang, and man, when it just hits. I know that. I understand that. I get that. But it happens. It can even happen after a major victory, kind of like we talked about with Elijah. Why is this? Because major victories usually take a lot out of us. Talk about getting fatigued. Man, if you're working hard to climb a mountain, anybody, you just went up them big old hard mountains. It's tough work. And when you get there, you're like, yeah. I mean, you have that moment of just exhilarating, but it's not very long where your calves and your legs and your lungs start feeling it, and you're just like, and it's tough. And in those moments, sometimes we think, man, I've made it to the top of the hill. But to get from this top of the hill to the next top of the hill, what do you have to go through? A valley. It's inevitable. Also happens after a huge disappointment. Job loss once again, you're hurt by family or friends, anything, just a loss in general. Just seems like we're more susceptible to those feelings. Another time, and just to add to this just really quickly, that, is after something awesome in your ministry or walk with God happens. Last Sunday, as Christina mentioned earlier, man, we had an amazing service here. It was amazing. I mean, altars were full. People were worshiping. We baptized 4 people. I mean, it was incredible. Incredible. By the way, can I just throw in, I'm going to challenge you. Don't lose what you have. Don't lose what you fought for. Don't turn around and put that Holy Spirit right back in a box. Man, it's a daily thing. It's an all-the-time thing. It's an every Sunday thing. It truly, truly is. But sometimes after moments like that, anybody ever notice that, man, you just come in here going, yes, and I can defeat the world, and I'm going out, and you walk out that door, and smack, life hits you right in the face. And it's just like, and as fast as you got it, you lose it. As fast as you get that feeling of just being like spiritually supercharged, I mean, it is sucked right out of you. And maybe it's not immediately when you leave the door. Maybe it's the moment you walk into Walmart and somebody comes and sucks your joy out of you. It happens, not because you're at Walmart. We have Walmart employees here. It's a good place most of the time. But it happens. When you're doing exactly what God asks you to do. Once again, experiencing depression in itself, as bad as it might be, I don't believe that it's wrong. It's living in it that causes the problem. Allowing ourselves to stay in it every day, all day long. And if we can recognize, and your trigger may be something different or, than what mine are or anything that I've listed, but we can learn to prepare for it and learn to fight it. Now, let me just take care of something really quick, because somebody might be sitting out there going, but Pastor Ron, I have a problem. It is a medical thing, and it is. It can even be a generational thing, a hereditary thing, and I get that because it runs in my family. I get it. My real dad suffers from it. His brother suffers from it. My mom's even went through it. My grandfathers went through it. I get all that. I do, I promise. Medical, I get it. I do. There was a point in time in my life where, years and years ago, where I sought medical help for it. And you know what? Listen, and I'm trying to tell a story this morning. Joyce Meyer, many of you know Joyce, and great woman of God and speaker. She said something one time that, I'll never forget. So it's something simple. If you got a headache and you want God to heal it, then pray to God and have Him heal it. But if you still got a headache, why don't you take a Tylenol? Because God gave the knowledge to the person to make the Tylenol. Sometimes people need help. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean anything of the sort. It just means that maybe that's how God, wants to help you. But I get this. I get all that. However, it's still my choice to fight it or not. It is. And so this morning, I want to look at something in a story from the chapter of the story that we're in. I want to look at Paul. Paul was doing some awesome stuff for God, and he was seeing people saved and changed, and God was using him. But, then we get to this place in this story of Paul and Silas, and they'd been doing God's work, and they found this woman who had this evil spirit, and so they called it out for what it was, and they stood up and said, you're wrong, get out. Well, the owner of this lady, or the people, that were kind of over her or whatever, they got mad. And so, in Acts chapter 16, we'll pick up the story right here. And it says, starting in verse 19, they seized Paul and Silas, and they dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, these men are Jews and throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice. Verse 22. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. And when he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell, and he fastened their feet in stocks. So, we think of Paul, and we read about Paul, and we think about all the awesome things that he did, and all the sermons that he preached, and all the lives that were saved, and the people that were baptized. But we forget that he spent most of his ministry, and he did. He spent most of his ministry alone, or beaten, or in jail. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face the daily pressure of my concern for all the churches. That sounds like a great life, doesn't it? I mean, seriously, if that's what we had to face every single day, who wouldn't be depressed? I mean, who wouldn't get sucked into, feeling like, holy cow, what am I even doing? Or be like some of the prophets and curse the day that they were born. Any one of just one of these things would cause, just a craziness inside. But now he and Silas, not only all of this stuff, they've been beaten and it's just, and now they're thrown into this dark and stinky and wet, dungeon of a jail, and they're shackled, and here, all because of what God asked them to do. They were doing what God asked them to do. So from this story, I want to share two very simple things. And I mean, they are extremely simple. But I want to share two simple things that we learn from this story that can help us as we go through these seasons. Now, I just want to, it's not easy. It's a daily thing sometimes for some of us. Sometimes we go through the seasonal things and it lasts for a few days and we're right back out of it and we're great. But then some of us, it's a daily thing. But regardless of how long the season is, these two simple things are powerful when it comes to fighting this every day. The first one is worship. Those of you last week that allowed yourself to be lost and gone in worship for a while, I promise you, if I asked you, how did you feel? You would tell me, great. Even those of you that came up here with a struggle in your life, even those of you that maybe were wherever you were and something was going on and you just lift your hands and your heart to God and you spent just a little bit of time in worship, there was something that happens when you fully give yourself to God in that way. Worship. But my life stinks. Worship. My marriage is almost over. Worship. I'm broke and have nothing. Worship. They've treated me bad and they've hurt me. Worship. My loss is just too much. Worship. Just worship. You find a way to get to that place. You find a way, and it's not just a Sunday morning thing, it's a life thing. There have been days that, listen, I'm going to be real honest because, I've told the story before when I go out and get in my mower, which the grass is about to stop growing, so, I'm kind of thankful for that, but there would be days I'd having a bad day, and I'd go get on a mower, and I'd stick my headphones in, and I'd have my Pandora set to, my Hillsong channel or, something. And it was just like, man, I would just spend some time just right there with my music on and I'd be worshiping. And it's just like things would get better. But then there would be days that I would go out there and maybe, I purposely didn't bring my headphones or I forgot them or whatever. And you know what, that time, instead of spending there worshiping, was probably spent on negativity. And that's what I was pouring into my life. And it just made my day worse. Because of what I chose to put in. Now, my circumstances were still maybe rough, and my circumstances were still hard, and maybe I was still having these feelings. But what I was choosing to do in that moment mattered. And when I worshiped, it changed my life. It changed my moment, and it changed my season. In verse 25 of this story in Acts 16, it says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. At midnight, the darkest part of the night, the deepest part of the cell, after they had been beaten. This was a defining moment. They could have been doing anything else. Anything. They could have been griping. They could have been complaining. They could have been whatever. And they chose at this moment in their season to worship. To worship. They lifted their hearts and their voices. And listen, worship is powerful. And in that moment, we can either be consumed by the power of darkness or we can unleash the power of worship. And I want to say that again. You can either be consumed by the power of darkness or you can unleash the power of worship. That's a big deal. We were created to worship. Not just in seasons, but all the time. Life may have been this, but God is still God and He is still good. And in knowing that, our response, in Hebrews chapter 12, it actually says this, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, since God is giving us all this, because of everything that God has done for me, and I know my life stinks right now, but God is really, He is God, and He still does amazing things, and because of all that, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably with reverence and with awe, for our God's a consuming fire. And you know what? People may think you're crazy. They may look at you and think, how in the world can you do this because this just happened? How in the world could you do this because of what's going on? Because God is still God and I love Him and He loves me. How? I don't know, but I just know I love God. But this is bad. Yeah, I know, but I love God. In those moments, I may have been beaten. I may have been chained. My marriage may be struggling and broken. My relationship with my kids may be broken. I may have nothing, and my microwave may have just went out. That happened to me this week. After last week, it was my washing machine and 2 tires for my daughter's car. I could go on. Some of you could too. It's like, where does it come from? I'm just dishing it out, and nobody's giving me more. Don't think you can't get depressed about your finances, because you can, amen? You can. It can make you feel awful. But you worship. My wife brought me home a new microwave last night. Woohoo! Now I got to put the stinking thing in. Woohoo! Amen. All right. Acts 16, verse 28. Suddenly there was a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and once all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. You want to experience freedom in your depression, in your sorrow, in your struggles, okay? Worship. Just find a way. Worship. Number two, as we close this thing out pretty quick, invest in other people. You say, whoa, wait a minute. I'm messed up. Yeah, they're messed up too. See, Pastor Ron, I don't even feel like talking to people. Yeah, I don't either. You invest in other people. I can promise you that going through this struggle alone is a whole lot worse than going through this struggle with other messed up people. We were meant to do life together, not only when it's good, but also when it's tough. Invest in other people. Dr. Carl Menninger once gave a lecture on mental health and was answering questions from the audience. Someone said, what would you advise a person to do if that person felt a nervous breakdown coming on? Most people thought he would say, go see a psychiatrist immediately, but he didn't. To their astonishment, this was his reply: lock up your house, go across the railroad tracks, and find somebody in need and help that person. Wow. Isn't that cool? Man, that's real right there. When you feel your worst, when you're at your lowest, go find somebody else who is too. Pick up a phone, send a text, send an email, go hang out with somebody. Go to Walmart. Once again, no offense, Walmart people, but you can find some messed up stuff. People bringing their, okay, let's get off of Walmart. Go to Town and Country. I don't care. Go to the mall. I'm serious. People with problems are all around. You know, that's why you can't find a perfect church. People, if people's looking for that perfect church, you will never find it, because you can't find a perfect church with an imperfect people. We all have problems. We all have issues. We all make mistakes. It's a part of life. It just is. Investing in people. Don't focus on yourself. Get involved in other people's lives. Acts 16, 27 through 34. Worship team can come on up. The jailer woke up. When he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted. Now, mind you, I have to believe that Paul and Silas were still very sore from their beating and their bruises and their lashes, and it still stunk and it was still nasty. I don't care if the doors were open and the chains were off. They were still in that moment, in that season. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We're all here." And the jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. And he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you'll be saved, you and your household." Verse 32. Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his house. And at that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds, and immediately he and all his household were baptized. And the jailer brought them into his house, set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. Paul and Silas had made a decision in the moment, in the season, to regardless of their situation and their circumstances, to invest in somebody else. They worshiped. Man, and then we're taking that love that they felt from God and they were giving it away. There is freedom found in investing in others. There is. I've told this story many times. I'll tell it again because it's a story that I'll tell to the day that I meet Jesus. One of the greatest examples that I've ever witnessed in my entire life, and it is not just because it's my family. I watched my mom and dad go 25 years ago. One of the most horrific things that once again, the loss of a child, losing my sister. She's been gone for a little over 25 years. And I was a brother, and it was just awful. I couldn't even imagine what my mom, but you know what I did? I watched them, you know, in that grief and in those moments and in that the depressive season and all of that, they were investing in other people. They're still to this day, if someone loses a child, still one of the first people to send a condolence, still one of the first people to make a contact. Still, it's just something that they continue to do. Not too long after my sister passed away and my mom was kind of going through some things, she ended up at Cox South Hospital working in the neonatal intensive care. She was holding babies in the palm of her hand that probably weren't going to get to experience life, and was dealing with parents who were going through these tragedies and these struggles and these losses. She was investing in people. And I would be like, man, and that was back in the day when me and God weren't, we weren't like this, and so I'm questioning all this stuff, why my sister had to die, and now my mom is walking into a place with other parents that are experiencing the same. I don't get it. But she did. She got it. And they kept investing. And they still invest to this day. To this day. They never stopped worshiping God, and they've never stopped investing in other people. Never. 25 years later, they still don't. So today I get it. I live in it all the time. It's my battle. It's one I wished I didn't have to fight. And my wife would probably say amen. She's a rock in my life. Sometimes she'll hug me. Sometimes she'll knock me upside the head. Come on. It's a real fight. But it's a battle that I can't quit, and you can't either. The moment that you quit's the moment that it ends. You can't quit fighting. Worship will set you free. Investing in others will set you free. You have hope. It's not over. You're not doomed. You can make it. I promise you, you can make it. And there may be seasons and there may be times where you feel like you can, or there may be seasons and times like some of these Old Testament prophets, and you might say, I'm just done. I'm finished. You can make it. You can make it. I want to end with this story. Several years ago, an experiment on endurance was conducted at the University of California at Berkeley. The experiment involved placing Norwegian field rats, of all things, in a tub of water. They were forced to swim until they grew exhausted and they finally drowned. Sound pretty cruel. During the first experiment, the researchers discovered that on average, these rats were capable of swimming for over 7 hours before drowning. A second experiment was conducted exactly like the first, but with one exception. This time, when a rat was getting too exhausted to swim any longer, the researchers would remove the rat from the tub of water for just a few seconds and then put the rat back into the water to continue swimming. These rats were able to swim for almost 20 hours without perishing. The researchers concluded that the rats in the second group were able to swim so much longer than the first because of one factor. They had experienced a rescue, and what kept them going was the hope that they would be rescued again. That's pretty cool. If you're here today and you're struggling, if you have struggled, or when you do, hope is always found in Christ. It is the rock that will never move. He'll always be there. And as bad as circumstances get around you, as bad as things look in your life, maybe in your community, maybe even in this world, but we could relate to that right now, couldn't we? God is still God. Jesus is still Jesus. He still loves people and expects us to do the same. And in those moments where we're chained and shackled and beaten and sitting in a cold, dark, dungy prison, you can still worship, and you can still invest and love people. You may not feel like it. You may not want to, but remember this. In this story, It wasn't just Paul and Silas's lives that were set free and changed. It was the people around them too. God can use you in your misery.